Well, let's get more on this now and speak to Dr. Ashok Kumar, Senior Lecturer in Political Economy at Birkbeck University. Dr. Kumar, thank you very much for being with us. How unexpected and unprecedented is this climb down from Modi?
It's very unexpected and it's very unprecedented, like you said. It's since 2014, since Modi took power, there hasn't been a single public climb down. There have been sort of behind the scenes climb downs, but nothing public, which really pierces the kind of mythified and kind of imagery around Modi and the kind of ways in which he's treated by his supporters. And then it's unprecedented, and it's unprecedented in that way. But it's also these protests have been going on for a year. They'd escalated at different times, but the encampments were still there. Yes, the upcoming election, like your reporter suggested, may have influenced it to some extent. But the BJP, the ruling party, controls 4 of the 5 states. There's no indication that they will lose any of those states, or even come close to losing any of those states in recent polls. But I do think that, the ongoing protests was influencing and has influenced public perceptions. And so that was something that Modi and his supporters and the people around him must have calculated and said, okay, that this is a political calculation. We have to repeal these laws.
And so this now being claimed as a victory for the people. Why was it that the laws were so controversial, sparking that year of demonstrations?
Well, there's 3 parts to the law. The first one, which is the most controversial bit, was about minimum pricing. So there's 23 crops in India that are included in this minimum pricing that were introduced in the 1960s. And basically, what it means is that these are cash crops. In order to ensure that that India, the vast majority of India, is still small farmers that have small amounts of crops. They sell at a mandi, which is a government sort of marketplace. Where the regulation is in place. If that went away and it became deregulated, what would end up happening is these small farmers couldn't compete, and it would be up to the vicissitudes of the market, and only big conglomerated farmers would be able to sell to and make a profit, and then those would become larger and larger. So that fear isn't unfounded. I mean, it's very much based in the evidence. Places that have deregulated the agriculture sector have seen consolidation, the dispossession of poorer farmers, and so the fear was very justified. And so people, withstood the violence of the state and the systemic attacks to continue the struggle, and it was victorious.
And those weren't demonstrations just taking place in India. They actually spread across the world as well.
Yeah, you saw that in Britain. You saw that in places with high concentrations of South Asian populations, in places like Canada, New York, Britain, in places like Birmingham, other places, specifically the large numbers of Punjabi and Sikh community, which were driving it, because these are Haryana and Punjab are the kind of bread baskets of India, and so they are where you saw the protesters really mobilized at the greatest numbers in place and sort of populating the encampments.
What was the government's justification for bringing in the laws in the first place?
What was the government's justification? Well, they said that the government felt that this was a outdated system, and you have to understand the ideology of the BJP is not only Hindu right, but very much about increasing profits for larger corporations. It isn't a kind of social democratic party like you see with like the Congress Party, despite its flaws, but it's much more of a party that was attempting to allow for the kind of marketization of the farming sector. And so that was their justification. The justification was that it was presented as a kind of modernization effort.
And agricultural experts, some of them at least, now saying that this reversal is going to be a big blow to India's agriculture because it's not able to move forward.
Well, I mean, it depends on what they mean by that. I mean, the Indian agriculture sector, if you look at the last 10 years, has been steadily one of the only parts of the sector that hasn't been volatile. And so, yes, you have issues of that it hasn't been financialized, but it depends on how you determine that. If you look at how much farmers are getting paid per price, per product, is higher than the rest of South Asia and the rest of East Asia. So, It depends on how that's determined. Yeah, is it less profitable for larger conglomerations? Sure, but is it more equitable for farmers? Yes.
Now, we touched a little bit on the spectre of the upcoming elections, but how big a political challenge has this been to date for Modi?
Well, it's really difficult, right? So Modi has apologized publicly, which is, really, again, like I said, pierces the kind of presentation of how he is, this kind of machismo, mythified Manichaean figure. But the apology doesn't go, far enough. If you look at what happened, for example, to the protesters, they were attacked by the government relentlessly. Communication lines were cut down. They were killed. Over 700 were killed or died during the course of the protests. A number of them attacked specifically by the police. And these kinds of efforts by the state were really unpopular. They became incredibly unpopular. The more they attacked, the more they were attacked, the more sympathetic people became of them. And even when they were branded as terrorists and anti-nationals and separatists and thugs by the media constantly, they were people didn't really buy that. In previous protests like the CAA protests or even in Kashmir, the government could say that and get away with it, and people it had some kind of popular resonance. In these protests, it simply didn't work. And so the effect was quite significant. Now, what is the direct effect it'll have on the elections in 2022? It's hard to say. Polls right now suggest that Modi is pretty safe in those states, particularly in Uttar Pradesh, which is the most populous state. But in general, I think the reverberating effects of something is enormous and can't be overstated. How significant it is, this climb down.
Dr. Ashok Kumar, good to hear from you. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.